I am almost done with my Field of Battle class series. I only have one class left to make a video on, which is Crusher. It is the newest and one of the most hated classes, and is the only class not over 5 years old, as it is 6 months old. Let's look at the stats. Crusher's positive stats are plus 20% hammer damage, plus 40% armor, and minus 5% hammer cooldown. The negative stats are minus 70% sword damage, minus 70% axe damage, minus 25% max mana, and minus 10% run speed. For an overly hated class for being too strong, it is a lot of negative stats. Crusher is a tank that does high hammer damage but has lower mana, speed, and can't use any other melee weapon. Stat 1, plus 20% hammer damage. This stat makes Crusher do significantly high damage. Hammers already do tons of damage, and this boosts it even higher. It allows Crushers to do significant damage to bosses, generals, and players. Since hammers can also attack 2 enemies at a time, this is basically plus 40% damage when there are multiple enemies. Stat 2, plus 40% armor. This stat is the reason that people hate Crusher. They argue that Crusher is too tanky. It's Crusher's best stat, as no other class has this much armor. The closest one is Paladin, but it is still 20% less. Stat 3, minus 5% hammer cooldown. This stat makes attacking with the hammer slightly faster. It is so small though and has no reason to exist. Stat 4, minus 70% sword damage. This stat makes swords almost completely useless to Crusher. Even without it, I don't know why somebody would play Crusher and use the sword. This is still a bad downside. Stat 5, minus 70% axe damage. This stat is what I consider the worst part of Crusher. You can still use the axes, and the afterburn and gas from them aren't affected by the stat, but it makes it very hard to fight massive amounts of enemies above level 10. This mixed with stat 4 makes it that Crusher can only use its hammer. Stat 6, minus 25% mana. The stat doesn't affect the Crusher too much. It just means that he can't use as many spells as Fighter or Archer. Crusher can still heal using Lifesteal, but can't afford to waste mana on Blink, heal, or slow in most situations. Stat 7, minus 10% run speed. This negative stat has the smallest effect. It makes the Crusher slightly slower. It doesn't change anything, but it mentally annoys me. I hate that Crusher and Paladin have slightly lower speed. I feel like I'm 30% slower. Conclusion. Crusher is a class that shouldn't fight large amounts of enemies. 1 or 2 is the ideal amount. Many say Crusher is too strong, but I'd argue that Crusher is too weak. The armor stat is great, but I'd rather have no armor buff but can use any melee weapons full 100% damage. I give Crusher a 6 out of 10. It's the same score as Archer, but I'd say that Archer is slightly better due to the insane bow buffs, while Crusher has a very small hammer buff.